Welcome to Franchise Killer, a podcast where we pick movie franchises or wannabe franchises, review them film by film, and see where things went wrong. Or right.
Oh, wow.
Do we all kind of go in the same...
Why did y'all go to mute?
He did kind of an Owen Wilson.
Hey, wow.
And I guess he does kind of have an Owen Wilson...
Sam Rockwell kind of has that
He does.
Texas accent.
Is he from Texas? He's not from Texas.
He has the Texas accent, is all
Now
I'm
I'm
saying. He
curious
kind of
as
sounds
to-
like...
I don't know if that's a Texan accent.
Well, Owen Wilson's from Austin.
He is?
Well, he's from Texas, and he went to UT.
Sam Rockwell's from California. Daly City. Daly City. Sorry if I'm saying that wrong. Daily residence.
Like the Daily Bugle.
Yeah, but we all went to Sam Rockwell, obviously. I'm Reese. Across from me we have...
David.
To his left.
Irina.
To my right.
I'm Sam!
Also known as...
Noah.
And placing a cloned corpse of himself inside a crashed rover so Lunar Industries does not suspect anything, we have...
I'm Sam.
Also known as...
AJ.
AJ Bell.
He really took one for the team.
Yeah, he did.
It's funny, though, because we were talking about Owen Wilson. I also feel like Sam Rockwell kind of has a Dax Shepard vibe a little bit.
Yeah,
You know,
he does
a little bit.
I can see it.
I could kind of see that as well.
And then you got the Kristen Bell connection there, so...
Hey, there you go. Sam Bell.
The familiar face rings a bell, I guess.
I wonder what movie you watched this week. I'm curious. The movie we're talking about, of course, is Moon. It's directed by Duncan Jones, who also directed... Why am I blanking? Oh, yeah.
Warcraft?
Source Code, Warcraft, Mute, and the upcoming... he's making some other video game-based movie, I think. It's a... Oh, my God. It's Rogue Trooper. Yeah, it's called Rogue Trooper. Sorry, this is off the top of my head. I usually have this written down right in front of me, but I don't have it. The movie stars Sam Rockwell, Kevin Spacey. I missed that on the first pass. Dominique McElligott. That's tough. Dominique McElligott. Kaya Scodelario. Benedict Wong. Matt Berry. And Malcolm Stewart.
Matthew Berry.
Which, how much of those did they got barely anything in this movie, yet they're still kind of there. Like, they're even blurry in the screen that you see them through, but they're actors.
Yep.
It's weird, like, seeing Matt Berry's name in the cast before watching this, and
Dude,
being like, Matt Berry's in
When I
this.
saw him, I immediately recognized him by his voice and the shape of his hair. Like,
He's always got that
shape
big...
of his
yeah.
hair.
Irene and I were watching it, and she goes, wait a second.
Yep, very identifiable. The movie's written by Nathan Parker, with a story by Duncan Jones. So he had the idea, Nathan Parker pinned it all out. So for those that are new to this show, on this podcast we first go over our thoughts on the film before revisiting it for the episode. Then we dive into the story, break it down bit by bit, and talk about the more significant moments. Then towards the end of the show we give our brief reviews and numbered scores, along with an analysis on the health of the franchise and whether or not this film hurt it. So AJ, had you seen Moon before this episode?
I believe... Let's see. I'm trying to... If I could turn back time... I'm trying to remember first time I saw this movie.
To the good old days?
Well, I mean, after all, Cher's always been a big name, I guess,
Oh.
so...
Moonstruck.
Moonstruck.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Nicolas Cage is definitely in this as well.
The movie wasn't too sunny, though.
No. Okay, well, you watched Moonstruck. Again, kind of missing the mark on your own miniseries, but, that's okay. You watched what you watch?
Yeah. So, Moon, yes, I had seen this before. I don't know how I came... Actually, don't really remember how I came about it. I just remember, instantly gravitating towards it. Yeah.
Okay, David?
I definitely thought I hadn't seen this. Maybe I haven't still. I know this sounds weird, but when I was watching it...
Are you a clone?
I might be a clone. I was watching it and I was going, wait a second, this seems really familiar. And there are some scenes that really stood out to me, and I think it might have been on the background somewhere where I picked up on some of the scenes, some in the beginning of the movie and some at the end, but I hadn't sat down to actually watch it. So take that for what you will.
Noah?
I'd never seen it until recently, today.
today.
fact.
And Irina.
Nope, never saw it before.
And wow, so that's a clean sweep for us, except for AJ. I had seen this. No, sorry, I had not seen this. I had seen Mute, weirdly, and not this movie.
Why?
Which is so.
I'm surprised.
I know,
It's
it's
usually
so
one of my
backwards.
go-to like recommendations of movies you probably haven't seen. And
I know.
feel like I would have recommended this to you.
Yeah, maybe you have, and it just kind of got lost in the shuffle of all the stack of movies that I need to watch. It's definitely been kind of a back burner pick for a long time. There's another person I know who recommended it to me as well, and I guess it just fell on deaf ears, and I was like, yeah, I'll get around to it.
Well,
Like,
you got around to
fell
it.
on deaf ears. It
did.
wasn't Mute.
Sorry, I got
but-
you, babe.
Yeah, the thing is, like, it's one of those movies just like 2001 where it kind of like my impression of 2001 that it was just one person in like a small contained space. That's what I thought it was, which it wasn't. And this one I was like, oh, it's a small person in a claustrophobic space and he has to talk to himself the whole time. Like was my impression.
And
of
in a
this.
way, he did.
Yeah, and in a way he did. But the movie's again, proving me that it's a much different thing than kind of what I had conjured up in my brain. So yeah, it shouldn't have been on the back burner as long as it was, but I'm glad we're finally covering it, and I got to see it. With that said, David, do you want to do that quick call to action for us?
Yeah, I think I can. Man, I feel like we've done all the bits, so my idea for all the bits are gone.
Oh, you can try to power ahead and do, Sam Rockwell for the whole thing.
Look, I'm just telling you, I'm giving the presentation.
That was actually pretty good.
At first, it was pretty good.
It was going the right direction. I forgot words.
No, you're his character as he's starting to succumb to his clone illness.
I'm dying. I'm at my
Yeah.
3-year mark, guys.
David,
Reaching the shelf life.
take two.
Take 2. Look, all I'm trying to say right now is that I'm the one who's trying to get people to call to action. I'm trying to get them to give 5 stars. No, I am. I'm here. I've done this before. I'm on the podcast. Excuse me, I will beat the living crap out of you because I'm the real David and I'm here to give it. Just give him a 5 star. Just say it. Just say it. Why don't you just say it? All right, fine. You know what? Give him a 5 star on Apple because that's the biggest and most important thing. You know what else?
Who are you telling who give him a 5-star? Who are you?
Look,
Give David
there's
a 5 star?
No, there's 2 different Davids who've all done this. There's a whole cloning system of Davids who've
I can't
given
tell if you're
this.
speaking to the listeners or the Davids to give the
No, there's 2 Davids fighting back and forth about who is giving the call to action.
You got
David
him to
gets
break
5 stars for that
character.
impression. Though.
Yeah.
Wow,
you-
thanks.
You kind of sound like the guy from Avatar: The Last Airbender that's like, the boulders conflicted.
No, you want me to do that one? The boulder's conflicted about his emotions. Anyway,
It's like a Nicolas Cageism, sort of.
to sum up, though, no, I sum up. We are here to provide you the best podcast we can, and if you want to help us out and have us continue to do what we do, go on Apple Podcasts, give us a 5-star review because it does something with some sort of algorithm and puts us up in front of other people, and we want that to happen because we like doing it. Also, we're on Instagram. I'm posting stuff about what we do. Sometimes there's some fun facts. Reese is on the Twitterverse, and we're updating some episodes on YouTube if you like to, do your podcast that way. We're everywhere you find podcasts.
Thanks, David.
Yeah, everywhere.
Yeah, thanks, man.
With that said, AJ, you want to take it away with that story?
Sam Bell reporting to Central. Everything running smoothly. Over and out. Rock and roll. God bless America.
Good morning, Sam. Do you want me to cut your hair there?
Lunar Industries remains the #1 provider of clean energy worldwide due to the hard work of people like you.
Daddy just has no
3 years is a long haul, you know.
I know you're really lonely up there, but I'm proud of you.
2 weeks to go, Sam.
2 weeks to go, buddy. I'm going home. Looks like we got a live one. I'm gonna go out.
Okay, Sam.
Leaving Serang working perimeter.
Perhaps you're imagining things.
What's going on? Where did he come from? Why does he look like me? You've been up here too long, man. You've lost your marbles. 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks. I don't understand what's happening. This is my mind. I want to go home.
I know.
In the near future, Lunar Industries has made a fortune after an oil crisis by building Sarang Station, a facility on the far side of the moon, to mine the alternative fuel, helium-3, from lunar soil. The facility is highly automated, requiring only a single human to maintain operations, oversee the harvesters, and launch canisters bound for Earth containing the extracted helium-3. Sam Bell nears the end of his 3-year work contract at Sarang Station. Chronic communication problems have disabled his live feed from Earth and limit him to occasional recorded messages from his wife Tess, who was pregnant with their daughter Eve when he left. His only companion is an AI named Gertie, who assists with the base's automation and provides comfort for him. 2 weeks before his return to Earth, Sam begins to suffer from hallucinations of a teenage girl and a bearded, disheveled man. One such image distracts him while he is out recovering a helium-3 canister from a harvester, causing him to crash his lunar rover into the harvester. Rapidly losing cabin air from the crash, Sam falls unconscious.
So, this is a pretty tall order for Sam Rockwell, I feel like. I know this is low-budget filmmaking, so there's not a whole ton of money on the line, but to have this guy just basically be the main point of contact for the audience, the sole performance kind of steering the ship. I mean, kudos to him. I think Sam Rockwell is an exceptional actor, and I think this really kind of turned over a new page for him in terms of how the public sees him as, like, because before this I would see him kind of as just a bit role player, like, and I hadn't seen him in too many other things, a support role, and someone who I don't think could be I thought he could be a convincing lead. Yeah. And this totally changed my mind.
This is, 2009? And then, so he was being considered for Iron Man, which is 07, 08?
What, like the actual... for the Justin Hammer role, correct?
Well, no, he
was
auditioned for Stark.
Yeah.
Oh, he was actually set to play Stark? I did not realize that. That would be interesting.
Yeah, that would have been a lead role. So,
yeah,
that's crazy. That would be very interesting. I don't know if could I see that.
I think after this, I could definitely see, and even knowing him as Justin Hammer in Iron Man 2, I could see it. That said, Robert Downey Jr. is Tony Stark, so
where it's more like he made what Tony Stark is today, or the way people interpret Tony Stark now. So he's just a big personality on his own. I could see Sam Rockwell doing like his own unique version, mostly because he's kind of like, he's an untapped talent in my mind. Like, there are so many things he's been in, but he, like you said, he's always been sort of a side player.
Yeah.
So it would have been cool to see what he would do with a significant lead role like that.
I can just see it now, him and Iron Man at the end of the movie, and they're like, "Are you Iron Man?" "Am I? Am I?"
Oh, Galaxy Quest callback. Love that movie. He's so good in that.
I think what draws me into this story, I've always been very partial to movies where there's a very limited cast and you're sort of like unfolding a story as you go, where you're not quite sure what the direction is. And I think another movie this brings to my mind is The Martian. And I actually weirdly kind of prefer this setup more, but I like both.
The video journals in The Martian is more, I mean, speaking directly to the audience, kind of.
Yeah.
So it definitely has that different storytelling style. But I think what I think of is here, a similar role is Castaway. So you have someone, talking to, this kind of inanimate object.
Yeah,
although
Gertie's like
Gertie is a
Wilson.
bit more
Yeah.
interactive,
Yeah.
but Wilson, the volleyball from Castaway, is kind of bouncing off the internal reflections of someone who's lonely and isolated, who's abandoned really on their own island. We're within their own orbit, kind of, and it kind of really allows a strong actor to, really step forward. And I mean, it's kind of a gamble, basically. It's a
it is.
kind of
thing. So if
situation.
they're not a strong actor, not talented, then it's going to fail. But it really lands well, and it kind of it's nice that it brings that intimacy. And I think it all goes all the way back to Shakespeare. You've got Hamlet talking to York's skull, like kind of thing. And so just those simple, small little things allow you to inject the nuances in your acting and your character. So that's what I appreciate that here. And obviously surrounded by an amazing set, in my opinion, and soundtrack.
Yes.
Very reminiscent of 2001.
Yeah.
Well,
And
and
I've been-
that's what Clint Mansell.
I love Clint Mansell.
He
His
did.
scores are so good.
Yeah, Lux Eterna from Eternal Sunshine, or not? Excuse me, Requiem for
Yeah.
a Dream. Sorry.
Yeah, he did the score for. Yeah, he does a lot of scores for. Why are names so horrible right now? I can list
Aronofsky.
literally every single one of his movies. Darren Aronofsky, sorry. Yeah, he does a lot of Darren Aronofsky scores, like Noah. I think he did the score for Mother and Requiem for a Dream.
Yeah.
Pie, he might have done. I'd have
He
to
did
check.
Pie. That was his first
Okay.
one when he moved over to
Yeah.
the States. But I mean, he really focuses, or he's kind of gotten into sampling and uses leitmotif, which is small phrases that are repeated. And it kind of mirrors the short lifespan of these clones, the 3-year cycle that kind of repeats,
Yep.
that loops. And it really just kind of builds the tone of this movie really well.
Yeah, for sure. And just to kind of get a sense of where we're at in this, just the setting of this story is on the moon. We've got Sam Rockwell. His name's Sam in the Sam Bell, and he's kind of farming helium-3 for Lunar Industries, and he's doing these menial tasks day to day. And Gertie's kind of keeping him in his place, or having back
Trying
and
to
forth
keep him
conversations with him.
sane and keep him, working efficiently.
Yeah, and for whatever reason, like, we have these video logs. I can't actually communicate with my loved ones, but I have these recorded video logs that I get to watch and kind of have, just that's my one contact to Earth, I guess, or the one thing he can kind of grab onto.
Right.
Let's say Gertie, the opposite of Sam, other than Sam himself. It's kind of, I guess, subverts your expectations because we're coming off of 2001. And HAL 9000 is the archetypical AI, which you expect to be, the cause of all the strife and stuff. And Gertie kind of flips that on its head, I would say.
What I love about
Gertie.
What I love about Gertie is that you get the idea that this is what one of these AIs would look like after this slob of a man's been living in this location for like 3 years. Like, it's got like a coffee holder with like just coffee spills on it and dirt, and I'm like, yeah, that's what
It's
that's what the
post-it
AI
notes
would-
on it with with writing all
Well,
over
that's
it.
why I love this set so much, because you can look at certain doorways in certain areas and see sort of like a buildup of dirt or grime in certain spots. So like things that are frequently touched and handled have a little bit of those like kind of grease and dirt stains like you would usually see just build up over time. I love details like that, especially for this. It makes a lot of sense because his character is basically representative of a working class man, even though he's doing a job that's vastly important. And I think a lot of people can relate to that, where they sort of feel like they're constantly on the back burner, but really they're sort of the backbone of an industry, yet nobody really listens to them. They feel ostracized. And I think that's further there's a further example of that anytime he's talking to what are they, these directors of the company, or I don't know. But like every time he's on some sort of conference call with them, they're pushed way to the back of this the end of this table. So like you're not even up close in person with them. You're still distanced.
Yeah.
Even though you're just on a video call. So it just
Everyone
it
is
adds
far
to
away.
that
Everything is far away.
ostracized feeling.
Everything seems unattainable.
Yeah.
The thing that I really like about their take on AIs for this one is that at first they're trying to get you suspicious of Gertie, thinking, okay, he's the bad one.
Did we think that though because of 2001 maybe? Because I agree.
No, that's why. It's because of all of the previous, 2001.
Yeah, this movie
and
knows
all
that
of
you've
them.
seen 2001.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
aware of that.
It uses some of those kind of creepy AI cues to like, how are you doing today?
Like hyper-focusing.
Take your pills.
Yeah.
And stuff like that.
I like
Are
the,
you hungry?
I like I like the part where they ask him a direct question. It's like, who is he? Or like, who am I? It's like, are you hungry?
Yeah, that's my favorite phrase.
Well,
But,
it goes back.
Oh, I just think it's super duper cool that he ends up actually having a heart of some, even though it's, made of metal and programming and all that. It's
Yeah.
Right.
But he's actually there to take care of Sam instead of, I'm on a mission. I mean, he is on a mission, but
Yeah.
he actually sacrifices the mission for, well, that's a little spoilery, but
Well, I don't know if it seems more like almost the opposite of Hal, because Hal takes it to the point where he has conflicting code, so he doesn't know what to do. It's all about the mission, whereas this one,
yeah, I agree. This one, it's like, he's tired of the mission and he just hates seeing all the Sams go through this.
Well,
so he's like,
Yeah, and his purpose is to help Sam. That's why he's there.
Yeah.
But he is the opposite of Hal, where Hal was bleeding edge technology, perfect, pretty much, infallible, supposedly. Whereas you kind of get the impression, going back to the dirt and grime, this is like, you're kind of B-rate AI, where it's just kind of simple and literally the expressions are what, 3-4 emojis. That's, how expressive it is. That's how it uses to communicate. So it kind of lends to that feeling of, so to the company, this person, Sam, is not important. Like, they're doing the bare minimum to, like, support him. Really.
Yeah.
yeah. The interesting thing that this does as far as AIs go is that usually in AI movies, the like Hal or whatever is tethered to what they're doing, but in this one, Sam is actually persuading Gertie to let him go outside or to say like, hey, come on, it'll just be between us two. And then Gertie's, okay, I guess so. Yeah. But only if you're staying right in this area. Instead of just being, no, that's
can be
against
budged.
the rules.
Yeah.
And I think that is more like how an actual AI would supposedly be, rather than everything being a black and white. It's kind of just more like a person.
well, in theory, a real AI would be just as conscious as a human being.
Exactly.
And this, it lends to, that's why, something I enjoy about this movie, why I'm drawn to it so much, is that tone is, there's certain low budget movies that you kind of can tell they're low budget, but they are super efficient with what they have, and they make such an engrossing atmosphere, or lack thereof, really, and they do a lot with a little, and that makes it more real and down to earth, or down to the moon, I guess.
Yeah.
But
There's this podcast I listen to called Blank Check, and I'm gonna steal this from them because I think it's true. But I think directors churn out their best work when they have like one hand tied behind their back, or it's like, or they're restricted in some way where you can't just take the easy way out. You have to get creative. And you look at, and this director, Duncan Jones, is a perfect example of that. Like, you look at his early movies, Moon and Source Code. I think they're both excellent. Like, Source Code was one that I had seen early on, and I was like, oh man, this director is someone to watch. And then they cut him a big check for his next movie. He does Warcraft, and while it's not bad, it's definitely one of those movies where like, okay, this could be a tricky scene, but you know what? Let's just run it through the CGI computer. Like I know I'm really minimizing the work of CGI artists, which is very tough, but it just loses something. Like there's less of a like desperation to this is a make or break, has to be great because this is my one chance.
Yeah, there's that insulating layer of money in the budget, really, that you kind of lose a little bit of the human direct touch, I guess.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And this is, Moon is a perfect example of, I can tell that they probably didn't have all the money that they could have used to make this the best of the best of the best. But also, maybe this is the best version of this thing that exists because of that as well. Like, it's very wise about how it uses its time and where it places its money shots and, like, the importance it weighs on, like, its best aspects or assets, like Sam Rockwell. It's like, okay, we got Sam Rockwell. As much as we can, we're going to focus the camera on him, and he's going to sell all of this for us. And then every now and then we'll pepper in these kind of big-time sci-fi shots, even though they're like using miniatures and all these things like that. It's just cool.
So the interesting thing to me is that this is a movie that could have been done in the 60s. Everything they're using in this, I mean, there is, I think, maybe one or two sort of small CG implementations, but nothing that couldn't have been overcome with, things we saw in 2001.
Oh yeah, like the kind of antennas and the things that they roll around.
The rovers.
The rovers.
Yeah. Well, those I think are miniatures.
I was going to say they could be miniatures.
I think they are.
I don't know. Well, they kind of show some movement on the rovers. They
roll around, as you said.
Yeah. Well,
but I don't know if that's a miniature necessarily. That
it
could
is.
be. Okay, it is.
Yep.
Dang,
Yeah,
good for them.
miniatures.
But they look really good.
They use a lot of practical effects, you can tell in this. A lot of the perspective shots, the lighting, and all of the handmade stuff inside the set. And, I mean, just the way that Sam Rockwell interacts with himself.
Amazing.
I can see a director making this work in the same exact way. Imagine like
but we're not there yet.
Imagine like a 30 millimeter camera with a little bit more film grain, slightly different color choices.
Yeah,
it would be.
Yeah, I kind of put us off the track for where the story was because I was talking about future Gertie.
I was just thinking more about like how they did it, but you're right. We should wait.
No, that 70s feel is on point.
Yeah. I actually have a question too, because I didn't do really any research into this thing, but watching this movie, it's very obvious there are a lot of references to figures of the Bible. Like all of those rovers or those all the things he's I don't know what they're called, but there's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and one of them has been scribbled out and replaced with the name Judas too. And later you find out when you know he has a daughter that her name is Eve.
Wow.
So like I haven't done any research
and he's
into
doing
this
some
at all.
woodwork too.
Yeah, exactly. There are so many references, but I don't know exactly what it's trying to say.
I was not in tune with any of that, so that completely went over my head. I wasn't even.
3 years he rises again, except 3 days. But
3. You're right, 3.
like a phoenix.
Do you have any answer for that, AJ?
I mean, those are, in my opinion, seasonings to what makes good sci-fi. And really, good sci-fi balances the sterile, cold, hard science with the, I guess, soft science or the humanistic aspects of it, because that's kind of often it's a reflection of humanity. And, this steers away from, kind of this overarching metamorphosis theme motif I wanted to try to have here as through line, but in a sense it still has this, is it metamorphosis, is it, transhumanism as we've talked about before, or is it, we see this degradation, this devolving of the physical human, but, the human spirit to try to overcome and overcome the isolation and loneliness and survive and struggle for survival is still there. But all those things, those little bits and pieces that are kind of Easter eggs, so to speak, they don't necessarily have to be saying this
Yeah,
is this
anything.
is that, but it really fleshes out the the texture of the movie, I would say.
Yeah.
This is aside from. Sorry, I'm going back to Sam Bell's character and Sam Rockwell as an actor, and he is remarkable at his natural body language on screen.
Mm-hmm.
Just watching the way he gestures and micro expressions, and it's so natural. It's like, oh, I know that guy.
Yeah.
He's this kind of character, and I don't know how he does that.
He's also one of the people he is funny without being like a straight up comedian. Like he's a naturally funny person, but when you think of Sam Rockwell, you don't think of Sam Rockwell. He's the real funny guy.
He's not
like
he's not really cracking jokes. It's his personality that's shining through in a comedic way.
There's when you're watching a comedy or you're watching a comedian in a movie, usually you can tell when they're doing a bit, like they're aware of the audience, but in this scenario it's very natural where he's like, that's just who I am.
Yeah.
Like none of it breaks the illusion of the character, and it's like looking at the audience like, hey, I just cracked a joke. It's like,
laugh.
Yeah.
He'll fiddle with things and just it's like
Yeah.
All right,
And I think that go ahead.
I was just gonna move on with the story, but go ahead.
Yeah. I was just going to say that this adds to why he is a very strong lead for this movie, and I think he works perfectly, is because he's not, like, I know I referenced The Martian before, and with The Martian you have Matt Damon, who, like, as much as I like the movie, I'm still distracted by the fact that, it's Matt Damon, like, I know he's this well-known movie star, and he comes across as aware of it. But with Sam Rockwell, he looks like a guy I would just see, someone that would just be in this role, or doing this kind of work. Like he feels very natural. And I think for an audience member, he's very relatable in this part. So it's, and that's kind of what adds to the sadness in my mind. Like if this had been like a blockbuster actor who's just really well known, I don't think it would have been sold for me as well. It would still be an interesting story, but I wouldn't empathize with him as much as Sam Rockwell is able to convey to me.
Yeah, and there's strangely another part of what makes him as a character, Sam Bell, shine through with Sam Rockwell's acting is also the costume. Well, not costume, but the clothes and the way he wears his hat.
Yeah,
and
his injuries, his condition.
Yeah. It's been worn. It's lived in, but not in a way that they're like, here, let's put all the dust here. This is war torn. It's like it just feels like, oh, he just wears that.
Yeah.
And
even so, with the black eye and how he acts when he's all beat up, and how he acts with the swollen mouth and the fat lip, and versus the clean cut one, and I mean, it's definitely great acting there.
Yeah, he really shines in this role.
So you wanted to move on with the story?
Yeah, I'm gonna do the second third here. So let's go. Sam awakes in the base infirmary with no memory of the accident. He overhears Gertie having what appears to be a live chat with Lunar Industries management. Lunar Industries then orders Sam to remain on base and informs him that a rescue team will arrive to repair the harvester. Suspicious, Sam manufactures a fake problem to persuade Gertie to let him outside. He travels to the crashed rover, where he finds his unconscious doppelganger. He brings the double back to the base and tends to his injuries. The two Sams start to wonder if one is a clone of the other. After a heated argument and physical altercation, Gertie reveals that they are both clones of the original Sam Bell. Gertie activated the newest clone after the rover crash and convinced him that he was at the beginning of his 3-year contract. Gertie confirms his memories of his wife and daughter are implanted. The two Sams search the area. finding a communication substation beyond the facility's perimeter, which has been interfering with the live feed from Earth. Gertie helps the other Sam access the recorded logs of past Sam clones, showing them all falling ill as their contract expires. Later, the older Sam discovers a secret vault containing hundreds of hibernating clones. They determine that Lunar Industries is unethically using clones of the original Sam Bell to avoid the cost of training and transporting new astronauts, as well as deliberately jamming the live feed in order to prevent the clones from contacting Earth. Clones who believe they are entering the final hibernation at the end of their contract just before the final return to Earth are in fact incinerated. The older Sam clone drives past the interference radius in a second rover and tries to call Tess on Earth. He instead makes contact with Eve, now 15 years old, who says Tess died some years ago. He hangs up when Eve tells her father, who is off-screen, identified as the Irvin, that someone is calling regarding Tess. After he returns, the older Sam begins displaying the same symptoms as previous clones as they began to deteriorate.
So
they find the other clone, so they start interacting with each other. They fight, basically, who's the original, where they both find out that they're both, copies of another original who's not there anymore. Gertie's kind of been in on this, but he's kind of helps them out a little bit here and there. They realize that their company is sabotaging them, jamming their signal from contacting Earth.
Mm-hmm.
What a absolutely messed up thing to do for a company. Lunar Industries.
The thing is, if you think about the future, you would feel like that wouldn't be too far from the truth in some scenarios.
It flips on, again, 2001, where it's, humanity sending out, the big bureaucracy, so to speak, NASA collectively sending out this big mission with, this perfect AI to explore outward and, for salvation or whatnot. And the computer's the one that turns on them. Here it's, the computer's the helper, and your original supposed benefactor or patron is the one that's the big bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, and at this point of the movie, I'm also still trying to understand what Gertie's role is here.
Yeah, it's still questionable. Yeah.
Why is it in Gertie's programming to be kind of helpful or sympathetic, quote-unquote sympathetic towards Sam? Or is this just
It kind of, I think at this moment it was one of those things where it's is Gertie really on his side, or is he just kind of evil,
right.
Hal was supposedly. But I think as I look back on it, going back to the conversation about how this company is kind of just doing the bare minimum for this facility, it's he's just one of those small little morsels that some businesses throw their lower ranked employees to keep them going.
Yeah.
And so that's what Gertie is. He's a help. He's not really hugely beneficial to him, but it's just enough to keep that worker going.
He does
He's the
hospital
Hydrox
work
instead of
too.
Oreos.
No, he does. Yeah, he does. But it's sort of that's the thing. There will be businesses that say, "Oh, but you get these benefits, even though we're not really giving you a living wage."
It's definitely more for people on Earth, because obviously he's continuing the cycle of the cloning process as well as providing feedback to the people on Earth.
I think I love this commentary. I love this message that's going on here, whether it's fully intentional or not. I'm inclined to believe it's very intentional. Is how his character as a clone is just representative of the workforce that bears the brunt of labor. And it's that they just kind of drive their workers into the ground until they've got what they need from them, and then just replace them with someone else.
We're all clones in the workforce.
It's like a human battery until they die out, and then they just kind of keep, replugging.
It had me wondering if did the original Sam Bell sign some waiver to the use of his DNA?
It might
or something?
be, yeah.
It
could be.
Hey, can we use your DNA in this workforce program? Blah 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 blah. Yeah, just sign right here.
We'll give you lots of money.
Yeah. And it's and kind of continuing the question of, is AI really like it? Can it become conscious enough that it's its own living being? This also has the question of if it's a clone, are they people? It sort of answers its own question in this movie, like the writer does in a way through the main character, but it's also doing that. It's kind of reiterating that question again, is like, if it's a clone of another person, are they their own individual person, or are they just a thing, you know?
Exactly.
Well, you notice the answer, as you were saying, the two clones are different in their personality. Like, and maybe it's one at the beginning who's not been ground down like the other one is.
Hasn't had the 3 years.
But you have to imagine over those 3 years, they take a different course, each of them. Like, who knows? The other Sam Bell might not be like into woodworking or whatever.
Exactly.
I think that's an intentional, like, I don't know. He'd probably find some other hobby.
Right.
But what were you going to say, AJ?
No, they do have different personalities, hobbies, interests, and yet at the same time, we had those hallucinations earlier on, which I think Duncan Jones himself kind of said that he envisioned that as, you know, there's a phenomenon with twins who they have kind of this supernatural connection, you know, that can kind of read each other's minds or have this kind of connection
Right.
that, you know, I guess most other people don't have with, you know, even their other siblings. But here they're not even twins, they're closer than that. They're identical
Right.
genetically, but yet that they can still be their own consciousness and person and individual, like Irina said. And I think that's, you know, one of the core messages or themes that this movie brings up, but it does so in kind of this subtly graceful way that it's not too heady and it's not overly didactic or, you know, highbrow or anything like that. It just kind of, this movie is actually, in my opinion, very digestible.
It is,
You know, even though it's somewhat dry, you know, superficially, it's not throwing all these big high concepts in your face. It just kind of tells the story of this one person or with himself and his loneliness, but all these things are, you know, attached as satellites to the story.
And it's not over 2 hours like a certain sequel is.
Oh, yeah.
But we'll get to that.
But this cast, it's complete inverse what you're talking about.
Yeah. So if we take a step back though and admire the way the story is told, Irina touched on this before and how it kind of unfolds. What's great is the lead up to the clones having their get together. You still actually don't know if he's just going crazy from being alone.
Yeah, because he'd been seeing those hallucinations too.
And you just don't know anything up until Gertie kind of confirms it. But even then, there's this little sliver of doubt where you're thinking, okay, possibly though Gertie is just manipulating him for some reason, or maybe he's imagining this, or
it allows a lot of open space to come up with your own sort of conclusions.
And I love that they show you the answer rather than just exposition dropping everything in an unnatural way.
Weirdly, in my mind, Gertie is the grounding figure.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of strange to place that in the, I guess you could call him AI, but the fact that I kind of rely on that character for explaining to me what the reality is while I was watching this movie. But I can also see your perspective where all of it could be just imagined for him.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
So he ends up grounding it later in the story, but up until a certain point, you don't know all the answers. It could be this way. It could be that he's insane. It could be that he's being drugged every time he eats something in order to forget stuff to continue doing work. Right. These are all just different scenarios that came into my mind, and I didn't know. Like, even whenever you're seeing both of them in the same room, they have them purposefully not talk to each other. And Gertie's like, "Oh yeah, it's you." Like, I don't know what you're talking about.
Right.
With the other one, and then eventually caves and is like, "Okay, yeah, y'all are clones.
He diverts,
it's
he
interesting.
dodges the question, and it almost harkens back to, again, make a comparison again, 2001, where, they go off into the EVA pod to have their private discussion away from the AI watching.
Yeah.
And then here, Sam and Sam are like basically bouncing off each other, like what's going on. And then,
Right.
but he straight up asks him, like, on a more trusting level, like, am I a clone? Because he's interacted with him so much.
Right.
But it's the dynamic of, like, Irina, like you said, the grounding force. He's steadfast, even though we're skeptical of motive.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
But we also, that allows space for Sam to develop his background as a character. And even though they're different people, they both have these implanted memories, but they're still true emotions to them about their family, how they met, Tess and their daughter Eve, and how they both react to that, the love that they have for their family. That allows that breathing room for the emotion to open up. And then that, in turn, later on in the movie, gets reflected off of Gertie again, in just those simple emoticons, the emojis, the crying tears later on. I mean, who would think that a yellow smiley or frowny face is going to be hard-hitting, passionate emotions in this movie?
Yeah.
Yeah. So do we want to talk a little bit about the kind of wizardry behind how they made these both Sam Rockwells interact with one another, or Sam Bells?
I can only imagine what kind of wizardry it is. Actually, I want to guess if you actually know the answer.
Dude, just say it.
I mean, I don't actually know, but my guess is the fact that they probably just did a really good time up of him doing scenes twice.
Well, there were scenes though where it was so like the ping pong scene.
Oh, yeah.
Where they're crossing over from both sides. Like one of them's, throws the pallet or the mallet. I can't talk right now. The paddle on the other side, and then the other guy walks over to the other side and like grabs it. And it's just like, it's so cool seeing one of them drop an item and it's clearly Sam Rockwell, and then another person who's clearly Sam Rockwell pick up that item.
So I don't know how what exactly the answer is there. It is definitely some movie magic. However, in the cast during the credits, it says clone Sam, and it has a different casting for it.
Yeah, oh yeah, I'm sure someone else did it, but the movie's so low budget that I'm just wondering how, like, if they CGI'd like his cut and pasted his face onto someone else. If they did that, then that's pretty convincing for the low budget that this is.
I assume they did two different scenes, and then if they did have him, it was more of a body double. For specific scenes.
I think that's
and
probably
then
the
they
case.
either had a green screen over his head, which made, if they did a switch, it would be easier that way, or they did a freeze frame stop where they, like, if he slams the paddle or if he's holding it, he's not moving, and then they just have him walk over and then take it, and then swap places.
Yeah.
They did that kind of thing in Lord of the Rings as well.
Yeah. Corridor Crew, cover it. Because they listen to
Actually,
the show.
I would love to hear them cover this.
But
David would geek out if
I
Corridor
would
Crew
geek
listened
out.
to us.
Oh my gosh, Ren.
I will also say there's few things more disturbing than seeing him deteriorate over time throughout this movie.
Oh, it's
the
so
original
sad.
Sam. Like, just seeing him slowly break down, I really find
That's
it...
heartbreaking.
Mr.
Well, it's not just
Stark, I don't
heartbreaking,
feel
it's
so
really
good.
unsettling. Like, it's just...
Yeah.
I don't like seeing someone just kind of fall apart before my eyes.
I think that's just, again, like, I'm just gonna keep bringing this up. Like, a lot of labor work feels like that, because over time you start feeling your body deteriorate because of the workload you take up, and that's your life, you know. And there are a lot of people that don't have the benefits of, higher working individuals, and so literally it feels like they're giving away their life force to be able to make money.
Yeah.
So I think this whole thing is just incredibly sad, and I think because a lot of people could relate to that feeling of, just feeling themselves deteriorate, even though his is happening at like an alarming rate. So it is so sad. Like especially when he starts coughing up blood, and you can tell like his face is all like pasty and white, and he's just like
bruised and battered.
There was actually a point where I was like, oh, just let it end, let him die.
And there were things that I think were intentional, but he would get injured, and like his body is not healing it, or it looks like he's just stuck with this injury now because the body's like breaking down. It's like, we don't need to fix that. Like it just stays.
Yeah.
And the cause for the damage, I mean, there's a couple things that could be going on, but it really is, the radiation, cosmic rays and particles and stuff like that, because there's no shielding that the company's invested in to protect their employees. It's cheaper to clone them. And then, probably more cost cutting on the quality of the cloning technology.
Right. Like there's some kind of defect in them naturally that doesn't allow them to progress past 3 years.
Can you imagine how much of a traumatic thing or thing it would be to hear? Like, hey, not only are you a clone, but also that person that is your wife, she's not around anymore. Well, also, you're about to die. Also, like, you thought you were getting out and going back home. No, you're about to die, and a clone of you is going to replace you. And hey, you maybe don't even have a soul. Who knows? Like, since you're a clone,
and you're just sitting there like, what the?
So no afterlife.
The thing that's so awful about, what drives it home even further, is that each of these clones have like the wedding ring. They have all of they have the pictures and stuff. So the company wittingly puts in
willingly
all of the.
They got to build the backstory, man.
Wittingly.
Okay.
They know what they're doing. Yeah. They know that he is a person.
Yeah.
And they're just allowing it to happen.
Yeah.
They don't just like they see him as livestock, but they know that that's a person.
Yeah.
Right.
Ugh.
Well, they know they got to
deciding
manipulate him.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
This is like a Black Mirror episode.
Oh yeah, honestly, that is kind of like where Black Mirror goes. Honestly, I think one of the moments that I really loved was when he discovers that pod that's supposed to be like sending you back home, and just how obvious it is that it's just there to pretty much incinerate you.
Think about it.
Yeah. But also that video message that you get just before you go is so believable as something that would just be scripted for whatever generic worker that they're talking to, where it's like, yeah, but remember, like, how proud everyone is of your hard work,
You're
and how
making
well
a
you've
difference.
done.
It's
You've
a
made a
company
difference,
thing.
you know, and you're like, oh God, this is just so horrible.
Yeah.
Capitalistic manipulation right there.
Exploitative.
Yeah, exactly.
How old was Eve in the video?
15?
6.
I know
Well, in the beginning.
In the beginning.
Oh,
3.
she looked like she was
6.
3 or something.
So
like
it's been 4 Sams then?
More or less, I guess.
No,
well, it
the
could
math-
be
the
that
math does
some
add up.
have fallen to accident early and then had to get another clone, so I don't know. It could be any number.
Yeah. Which part are we at, real quick?
So he goes outside of the signal to talk to his daughter. I just wanted to comment real quick. A lot of these rover scenes, we talked about The Martian. This had to have inspired a lot of these scenes. I mean,
Yeah.
they're so well shot, and the emotional interaction within that small confined space, even more so than the base itself.
The Martian had to have taken some cues, or at least the author of that book had to. I don't know when that book actually came out, because I know The Martian's based off of a book. But
yeah, Andy Weir, and it's good, and his newest book, Project Hail Mary, is excellent. And actually, reading that book is what was one of the key pushes for me to go into a sci-fi theme here.
Oh, I love it.
And that the newer book here does. Irene, you talked about how the biologist, the main character in The Martian, is kind of, you can't sympathize with because no one's a world-class biologist here. that I know of. But in the new book, he's more kind of an everyday guy, still smart, but it's a little bit more immersive that way. So great stories either way. So let's see.
Like, everything's been revealed at this point, right? Like, they know they're clones.
Yeah.
Like, all of that.
Yeah.
Right. And
he's,
so the original
starting
Sam
to
is
die.
on Earth.
Right.
Yeah, okay. And maybe I totally missed this when I was watching it. Is the original Sam still alive?
Yes.
It's it's very, that small scene where one of the Sams goes outside of the base perimeter to, where there's no interference, and actually calls his daughter. Or he tries to call Tess. The daughter answered, and she's 15 now. And then at the very end of that phone call, she talks to her dad, the original Sam, and then it hangs up.
I don't know how I missed that. And Mom's dead.
Yeah.
She's just calling for. She's like, Dad, and.
She's like, Dad, someone's asking about Mom.
Yeah. What's extra messed up is this means like the original Sam kind of sucks. Because and so does his wife, because she made all these fake videos.
Or he doesn't know about it.
Yeah, I don't think that there's a definitive, like, he could know about it. There's possible, as crummy as this company is, I would not be surprised that he doesn't know about it.
Well, then how did the wife make those fake videos for him?
Okay. Actually, I wonder if those might have been taped. And also another thing that points to this being just sort of a shady business they're doing right here is there are a lot of Korean what do you call it, figures, you see a lot of Korean characters, that's the word, like on things, and even in the video message they speak in Korean at one point.
It's the name of Sarong Base,
and that to me implies that at some point there were different kinds of people being put in this position. So I could imagine that at some point they thought, it would be cheaper and easier if we just got the DNA of one worker and just duplicated them and kept that going, rather than having to send people out there over and over again. So I feel like somewhere along the way that transition happened without him knowing. So
interesting.
Yeah, and not to mention the fact that these guys are clones with Sam Bell's memories.
Yeah.
And if you look at these guys, they're actually almost self-sacrificial.
Yeah.
Right.
For each other.
That's true.
So
they're kind of willing for the greater good, I guess, to get one of us back to Earth.
Yeah.
Right.
Which kind of allows you to consider that the original one is not a bad guy and didn't just he could have.
We will never know.
Yeah, we don't know. He could have, but I think you can assume that he didn't, throw all of his clones under the bus for a paycheck.
Where's that sequel?
Well, that segues into the rest of the story here.
Yeah,
let's finish it.
The two Sams realize that the incoming rescue team will kill them both if they are found together. The newer Sam convinces Gertie to wake another clone, planning to leave the awakened clone in the crashed rover and send the older Sam to Earth in one of the Helium-3 transports. But the older Sam, having learned that the clones are designed to break down at the end of the 3-year contract, knows that he will not live much longer. With his health rapidly declining, the older Sam suggests that he be placed back into the crashed rover to die, so that the Lunar Industries company will not suspect anything, while the newer Sam escapes instead. Following Gertie's advice, the newer Sam reboots Gertie to wipe its records of the events. Before leaving, the newer clone reprograms a harvester to crash and wreck the jamming antenna, thereby enabling live communications with Earth. He also brings along a canister of Helium-3 to provide him with funds once he reaches Earth. The older Sam, back in the crippled rover, remains conscious long enough to watch the launch of the transport carrying the newer Sam to Earth. The rescue team is successfully fooled after finding both a newly awakened clone in the medical bay and the corpse of the older Sam inside of the crashed rover. The helium transport arrives at Earth, and over the film's credits, news reports describe how Sam's testimony on Lunar Industries' activities has stirred up an enormous controversy, and the company's unethical practices have caused their stock to plummet.
You'd think this company would have a better read on their inventory. They're like, hey, we're missing a bajillion-dollar
Our
clone.
inventory.
Yeah.
That they have to have an inventory of clones. There's a ton of them.
Well, I think it's apparent in one of the early conversations that Sam has with Gertie, where he's telling Gertie, like, hey, you need to notify these people that one of these rovers or whatever, those machines out there, is not working properly. Like, it needs to get fixed. And Gertie says to him, like, oh, that's like really low on their priorities right now. So it just seems like they really don't care. You know, it's just kind of like, hey, it's working, just leave it be.
While this is also a working class message, this also could be a message from the standpoint of, you know, the way we farm and cultivate, you know, ground beef and and chicken,
livestock and stuff.
Livestock, and how they're just kind of mass produced in these breeding programs, and then, you know, kind of you just like, this one's going to be butchered and we'll use this one for this purpose and whatever, and it doesn't actually cost them that much to be able to do all that. All they need is to provide housing and feed for them.
Yeah.
So to them, he is just, you know, whatever, we have another one.
Acceptable
He's
loss.
just he's just a chicken to them.
I know. Oh, for sure. You'd think these would be pretty expensive chickens, though, but maybe not.
Well, when you think about all the things that they would need, I mean, I don't know what the cloning process is, but all they need to do after he's been cloned is just
well, they
feed
also
him.
have, it seems like they have a huge cachet of clones, so it's like that's an expense that was made before. And who knows, this could be far enough in the future that cloning isn't as expensive an enterprise as other things, especially if we're going off the idea that he's just a working class man kind
Just
of a
another
thing.
brick in
Like,
the wall.
who knows? So
So I think that this is definitely a statement on, like you said, the working class, and then the livestock, and then
something
the moral conundrums of companies and AIs.
Admire about my experience watching this movie is that with most movies like this, it is really sad, this concept, and it does kind of end on an uplifting note because he's at least getting back to society. I think in another director's hands, sometimes they push a little too hard into the sad, depraved side of things, and I leave the movie feeling just kind of sick to my stomach. This one,
literally this director with the sequel.
But at least in this one, I feel like there's a good balance of storytelling without having to like just drag me through the muck, you know? Like there's still something beautiful about it.
Yeah.
And that's in kind of like his memories of life and just the way they experience even their like really sad existence is there's still like humanity in it. So, and I think that's particularly exemplified between their interactions together.
Yeah.
Where it's they act as two different people, but there's sort of a genuine care there when you would expect there to be like a little more animosity in any other film.
Yeah.
But I like that kind of self-sacrificing aspect that they naturally have. So
By the way, this is something funny I just realized. Like, we just watched Gattaca, and if this had not gone as well for Sam Rockwell, the ending would have literally been almost exactly the same with a rocket ship heading off into space and another guy getting incinerated.
but in opposite directions.
Yeah.
They would say hi to each other as they passed by.
Yeah.
They'd be like those guys on the
Off to the
ship
great
going,
gig in the sky.
"Woo!"
But
He does go woo as he's making his way back to Earth.
Yeah, he does.
He's like playing with the the way his radio voice sounds.
Yeah.
You're just having fun with it.
So I do like, if I have to in any way be slightly negative, I don't feel the emotional gut punch. Like, it doesn't quite go for like the emotional high of this movie isn't as high as some of the other movies we've covered in this miniseries. Like, at the end, I'm not like pumping my fist. Like, I feel like it wants me to be, and I don't know why that is, and I can't quite pinpoint it because I don't think there's anything wrong with this movie. I'm just not like, not. I feel like I should be tearing up that he's like leaving, but I'm just like, oh yeah, good movie.
Yeah,
like good. Yep, this is how I wanted it to end.
I didn't think that.
Right, go ahead.
I don't
AJ.
know. Sorry, I didn't think that they were trying to get you to be like, yeah, because if they did, they'd relish in that moment, but instead they kind of cut it off.
I wish they had tried to make me go like that, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think that their point was like, he made it away.
It's a different build up to payoff.
Yeah.
I
What were you
think
saying?
the limitation there. So I almost see this movie as cinematic broccoli. So
Yeah.
it's got good content there. There's not like fat to it. It's not Brussels sprouts. So you're not holding your nose while getting through some, healthy message. But it's just enough to be kind of middle of the road. It's not exciting. I think they could have jazzed it up a bit. Put some cheese on it, I guess. But
Yeah.
well,
I think of another movie like another movie that worked with a low budget but was just totally successful in terms of like sending it off in a really emotional way was Sunshine.
Yeah.
That movie, and maybe it was like the music, just because that movie has some of the best music I've ever heard. But it just
The movie
really
also
sends
had
it
a
off.
very exciting ending, let's say, put it in that way.
Yeah. But yeah, it was more just like I wanted to be much more excited about him getting off the moon than I ended up being. Like I'm
It's because it's a
So-
clone, Reese.
No, it's
I think-
he doesn't mean meaningless.
I have kind of a theory about that, and it's because the way it ended wasn't necessarily like that was a positive thing. It was just a change. And
Yeah.
sometimes that's all people really want. So it's not really like a moment to celebrate because his life isn't really going to be better necessarily. He's still going to die in 3 years.
So would you say the ending was intentionally muted?
Yes.
I think so too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well-
I actually agree with that. I think it's supposed to be sort of this middle,
Muted to-
sort of neutral.
It's like muted to
I-
positive a little
Yeah.
bit.
Oh, it's like the end of Star Wars Rogue One.
Yeah.
I
Actually.
almost
What were
feel
you
like
saying?
if you had this really high shining bright point at the end, it would eclipse, the main content of the movie. So the actual like performances and the interaction
Yeah.
between each other. I don't know. I mean, I think probably the limitation there is having, the limited cast. I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
it could have been, well, no, I take that back. You're right. There was room for some a bit more dynamic.
Yeah, I could also
I think
maybe
you would have had
used
to
another.
invest a little bit more heavily earlier on for that to pay off. And I'm just trying to think how that fits structurally within the movie. But
I think the what adds to that too is that a lot of my emotion went to the Sam that was deteriorating.
Yeah.
Because he's the one you had a lot of the emotional journey with, whereas the new Sam is just kind of like a fresher, 3 years younger version, I suppose, where he's kind of just taking everything at hand and dealing with it in a very almost kind of robotic fashion. And so you're not as thrilled about him getting back to Earth as you would have been the other guy who has honestly has suffered a lot more in this film.
But at the same time, it has to be him.
Yeah, and I think that's where all my emotion went was when he died. That moment they're having the conversation talking about their shared memories.
Yeah.
And so when he was what were you saying?
no, yeah, the shared memories of really, and that I'm picking up right where you're going here. At least I think, there's a successful mission here that they establish us and them. You're on the side of this group here, and then you have them over there, that are the the obstacle to overcome.
Right.
Where they could have been poles apart, like one side or the other, and here they come together really well, I think.
Yeah. I guess I'm just a sucker for when in movies, and it's a very movie thing, which would be kind of antithetical to how Sam Rockwell is, which he's a very, like, average Joe type of guy. But I love those scenes in movies where a character knows that he's doomed.
Yeah.
And, like, it almost goes slow-mo for a second, and it's this long final walk to their demise.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, I could have used some, like, maybe a bit of a prolonged sequence where he knows he's going to die, and he's doing this thing, but that might be a little too, like,
So,
superhero-ish.
They actually kind of do that.
They do, but it's not like... It's,
Wait, they go out into that car, or the rover. And he... pretends he plays dead and then allows the other guy to carry him into the crashed rover. But then after that, as he's taken off and going back to Earth, it shows from his Sam, the decrepit
I know
one,
the scene you're talking
and
about.
He watches.
I know the scene you're talking about, but I'm just like,
I think that's what that is.
So that there needs to be two parts for anything, a high and a low. So
Yeah.
the counterweight that was not present in the beginning was a learning to fly scene, where him
Right.
recovering, kind of overcomes this obstacle going up on an upward trajectory where it finally pays off at the end. Instead of it's kind of more comfortably numb throughout, more steady along.
Yeah.
There's no, shine on you crazy diamond kind of brilliant spot at the end.
Yeah. It's still good. I'm still happy with the ending. It is not something where I was like, oh, well, man, that's stupid.
That
Like,
kind of sucked.
No, it's
Yeah.
like, it is a weirdly perfect ending. It's just something like the movie side of me likes a more glorious send-off.
Yeah,
I
I
understand
get you.
that.
More dynamic from the dark side of the moon to, the brightness, the light.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. So maybe it's more of an issue with me, and I just need to adjust to this
I
movie's
think
speed.
there's potential that could have been there. So I think that's perfectly acceptable criticism.
Real quick before we wrap up, do you want to talk about Gertie also being like, you know what, cool, you might want to wipe my system and all that.
The real MVP.
Yeah. What did y'all think of the Gertie's final advice to Sam and just the acceptance?
See-
like, hey, I kind of like. What do you make of that AI? Like this AI, I guess as a whole. Like,
He's
what is?
gone rogue.
He thinks, therefore he is.
Well, it
Welcome
does
to
make
the
me
machine.
think that he had some sort of prime directive where it's like, help, Sam Bell or whatever. And so that was almost higher on his priority list than some of the other directives he was given. But also I like to imagine that there's a little bit of like some kind of heart in the machine, but you never are given any moment to really fully get an answer on what level of consciousness Gertie has. So I like to assume that it's a little more on the fanciful side where he has a preference and he has kind of like a care for those he's been surrounded by. So
Yeah, he's just not there in the flesh, really.
right,
But
yeah,
there's that potential for him to like breathe metaphorically,
Yeah.
where he comes back to life, and even after his memory's been wiped, with the next Sam that stays behind, there's that opportunity for him to again reach that potential.
yeah. It somewhat felt kind of like the cinematic equivalent of when you watch those movies where like this cat and mouse game has been going on for a long time, and like the cop has your protagonist kind of in his line of sight of gunfire or whatever, and he's all like, I'll give you 10 minutes, and then lets them go. Like, that's kind of how it felt to me, where it's like, we formed this sort of bond and I sympathize with you, so I'm going to give you a
You're saying
chance.
the end of Pirates of the Caribbean 1, where he says, I think we can afford to give him a day's lead.
Yeah,
Or
his head
or,
stuck.
same type
or
of
in
thing.
Les Mis when he can't make himself
When-
take
Yeah.
out
Javert lets
Valjean,
him go.
so he
Yeah.
does the proverbial memory wipe.
I never thought the Noah bringing Les Mis into every conversation would come back, but here it is.
Honestly,
Don't
hold
bring
on.
it
I'm
into
just
a
gonna
lot of
say
things.
I actually thought about bringing that up over Pirates. But
That was not me being upset that you brought it up.
you're terrible, Reese. Why did you crap?
That
on
was me.
Noah?
Like, because there was a time, there's a stretch in our podcast where it would be like 3 episodes in a row, like Les Mis would be brought up.
I think you're getting that
No, that's Monte
confused
Cristo.
with
You're thinking of.
yeah, Monte Cristo.
Monte Cristo. He's brought up Les Mis a few times too. I know he has.
Great movie. Also, by
know
the
you
way,
have.
this I'm just back
Maybe.
to the movie. This is kind of the opposite of 2001, where Hal is basically begging not to have his memory wiped. And this movie's like, hey, do you want to wipe my memory?
Yeah.
And it's like, I'll do this for you. You know, that scene where he's typing in the password, that's like the Overwatch play of the game.
Play of the game.
It goes play of the game, and then it shows it, and in slow motion, it's password,
Pentakill.
pressing the buttons, the keys. And that was beautiful. Because
I
I didn't know,
actually-
because at that point, you're not certain about him, and you're like,
Yeah.
he either caught him, or I don't know what's going to happen here.
When they wiped his memory, I was actually really sad about
Yeah.
that, and like how quickly it could be done too. I was like, oh no,
Yeah.
he doesn't remember you now.
Wait,
Yeah.
so
Gertie.
would it change the movie if after all this happened, Kevin Spacey walks out from a secret room and he was actually just piloting this AI, quote unquote?
Yes, that would change the movie.
It would probably change it.
No,
That's
But in
that's
the
like
end,
the
he-
guy.
in
That's
the
like
end-
the guy behind the drapes in Wizard of Oz.
Exactly, that's what I'm
Oz.
thinking. Like he still let them go.
That's true.
Yeah,
Love it. All right.
No, this way it's like, here, have a cigar, then everybody's. Yeah.
Then Kevin Spacey pulls out his gun.
yeah.
and then
Got
he
it. Back to
sticks
that
his
one.
hand down his pants.
Oh, we didn't need to go there.
Well, no,
I'm sorry.
They're not 15, so we're good.
It's time to run out.
God.
David,
All right. Ending on a high note here.
Woo!
So that wraps up the story for Moon.
Young Lust.
We're
That
gonna
would
take-
be bad.
We're going to take a quick break, and on the other end, we will be going into our brief reviews with numbered scores, get into what critics thought, talk some box office, and then Moon, the franchise.
The
to close it out.
franchise?
Yeah. All right, we'll see y'all then. Welcome back. Let's talk Moon. David, you got our scores there in a bowl.
You know I do.
You want to pull them at random?
I will. All right, let's see what we got coming up first on Moon. If I can figure out how to open it. Noah. I lied. It was Reese because he folded it in a triangle like Noah.
How dare you?
There you go.
He did. It's Reese with an 8.5.
Oh,
Yeah, I feel like that is appropriate for this movie. If I have to just get the quick negatives out of the way, while I do think that this is an amazing work and a great directorial debut from Duncan Jones, I don't feel like it is the full potential of him as a filmmaker. I think this is almost a proof of concept as to the amazing director he could have turned out to be. Like, this is the first one, and the next one he gets like a little more money, where he's still, as I was saying earlier, still one arm tied behind the back, but has a little bit more to do and can actually fully realize all of his visions without being given every single tool in the toolbox. And on top of that, I think the ending is slightly less satisfying than I was kind of hoping it would be. But apart from those minor negatives, I think Sam Rockwell is absolutely firing on all cylinders in this movie, and he carries this whole thing on his back. And no, he doesn't carry the whole thing, because this is it's a two-hander. Duncan Jones's vision is equally as effective and successful as well. Like, I love this idea, and it's a very cool mystery that unravels in a. It's a story that if someone were to tell you the story on paper, you'd be like, no, that sounds insane. It's like a M. Night Shyamalan type of twist almost. and it almost seems like it would be implausible. But in this movie, they make it work naturally, and you believe it as it slowly unfolds. And even when the movie comes to a head at the end, and all these revelations are happening, it still kind of clicks all together and feels oddly simple, even though there's a lot going on. Also, I just love sci-fi movies that make you think, and this is another one of those that really does make you think. And that's been a kind of a trend on this mini-series with every single movie we've talked about, except for 2010, which really didn't make me think about anything other than that it was unnecessary. So yeah, Moon, really liked it. Glad I finally watched it.
All right.
Can I interject one thing before you stop recording later?
Sure.
Were all the scenes dark?
Dark?
No.
Or was it always night time?
Well, it was on the moon,
Mostly.
so...
Okay, that's not correct. Because there is no such thing as the dark side of the moon. It's the far side of the moon. Half the time it's light, half the time it's dark.
Ooh, interesting.
Or maybe they only went outside at night.
It says Dark Side of the Moon there. That's what it's there. There was a Pink Floyd album called Dark Side of the Moon,
Hey,
and that was erroneous too.
leave your input in there.
Or, hey,
Please.
wait, hold on. What if they're only mining when they're on the dark side of the moon, when they're not facing the sun?
You want to come over and say that into the mic?
No,
You can't? Why not? Because I can't say it like you did.
Our producer says that technically there is no dark side of the moon. Actually, it's all just kind of like the Earth where it's the sun, and it rotates, and then there's a dark side.
I love that.
Keep it if you want. All right, next up, Irina with a 9.5.
Yeah, I loved this. I always love stories, like I said in the beginning of the podcast, where it's a very limited cast or even one act, where the story is slowly enveloping and you get a little more intimate with your lead. So I find very little wrong with this, and I know it's his debut directorial work, but I think I was trying to approach it from the perspective of, like, how would I make this better? But I feel like all the messages I needed to see from this were already present. I think the only part that I would tweak a little bit is sort of a passing of the torch from the Sam Bell you got to know in the beginning to the Sam Bell that was awakened. Because there's just a little bit of a disconnect between me as a viewer and his character. So when he does return to Earth, I don't really feel that much of a connection with him. So like you said, it's a little lackluster in that way. I think that could be just resolved from a little more personality from his part rather than the person just trying to figure out what's going on. Whereas you got more personality from the first Sam Bell clone. So
it's also the fact that he doesn't have the same desire to go back home as the original one, who's been there for 3 years.
He's more playing the detective role.
Yeah, exactly.
So I would have liked to see either more bonding between him and our first character, or just something that was a little more revealing about him as an individual.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I love the rest of this movie. I don't think there's anything I would change about it, because I really enjoy watching something like this where there hasn't been a lot of talk about it that I've heard from anyone else, and I can just enjoy it purely fresh, without any assumptions about what's going to happen. So yeah, I'm staying with a 9.5.
All right.
Alrighty. Next up, David with an 8. Yeah, I wasn't sure where we were all going to land on this. It's a really well-made movie. I think Sam Rockwell does a great job. It's, I don't know. I think it's something you touched on, Reese, sort of towards the end of the conversation of the plot, where it's the ending payoff just didn't resonate with me very much. I enjoyed what was happening, but it's just like the emotional high didn't quite reach, and I guess in my own mind it docks points, but if you're into this kind of thing, I don't think it should dock points. But it just, I don't know. It's one of those things that just didn't land for me.
Yeah.
But I really like the performances and the
I'm
music.
pretty sure he landed.
Well, we don't. Oh, we do know. Yeah, he landed. He made it. We all know. But overall, very good. It's a good movie. I think an 8 is a respectable score. Next up, AJ with a 9.
Nice.
Yeah, so I'm a little lost for words because I actually have some significant history with this movie. I didn't really go fully in depth at the top of the podcast, but this movie's kind of been low key on one of my top favorite movies since I've seen it. I don't know, like I think actually what really seems to speak to me about it is, the tone. I really appreciate the soundtrack, the score by Clint Mansell here.
Oh, yeah.
And just, cinematography, all of it. When I first saw this movie, I was just kind of, I don't know.
Floored.
Lost for words. I was like, part of this movie is what's Astronomy Domine, which is like an astral chant. Instead of like Interstellar Overdrive, like there's that like big jet engine punch. There's signs of life here. It's just, it's almost like, Castaway where he's marooned. It's got some mundane character to it, I'll admit. And that's why I didn't, it's got room for improvement. It does need some dynamics. But part of that is just what kind of felt more genuine to me. And it's just kind of a similar thing where I really appreciate, Ex Machina. It's a low budget movie, but it's very well, it's kind of a passion project almost. It's very well cared for. A lot goes into it, and it turns out beautifully. And considering, a decade ago when I first saw this, it looked beautiful. Like I just feel like this is the moon, and it doesn't. It's kind of got eerie elements of it. You've got thrillers in space, but you've got this somewhat detective mystery aspect of it. It kind of hits all the bases. You've got some character doesn't really fully go in depth to resonate as high, but it never really overall wraps up into a nice package. I think time now, like comparing it to a lot of other movies, and especially with big budget movies like The Martian and stuff. Yeah, some of that sparkle is lost, and I think where I have the advantage carrying it, on turning away is just that history with it and what the original impact was for me. And it's not overly deep. I just think it's a really well-balanced movie, especially for the budget and what was delivered. Yeah, I do wish there's a little bit more, emotional dynamic. But overall, I think it's a very well-made movie. And I hate to be one of the sheep. It's like, oh, this is a cult classic. You have to see it. But really, it is. It's worthy of seeing. I don't know. That was
I'm
kind
gonna
of
say
rambling.
there's a reason why it keeps getting like re-released on like Blu-ray, 4K, all that. Like I think it definitely has a worthy following, and people are still really into this movie.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite movies to recommend to people, just kind of out of the blue. If they want a recommendation of something that they probably haven't seen. And I think this movie is easy enough to watch where it's not overly heady or preachy or, anything like that. It's digestible. It might not be the most thrilling, but I think it's a good sci-fi movie for people who may not even really care for sci-fi or whatever. So it's definitely an excellent movie in my book.
Awesome.
All right. And I guess there's only one person left. The other triangle fold, Noah, with a 9.5.
Wow.
Moon coming in strong.
Yeah, so I really like the movie, as made evident by my score.
I believe you.
There aren't really any issues that I actually can't find a real issue in it. However, like both Reese and David had said, I do like slightly more positive trajectory movies as far as the ending goes. and this one is a little more muted. However, I think that is perfect for the type of movie that it is. So it just can't quite earn that 10 points for me, though, because it's just not quite my thing. That said, though, Sam Rockwell, he makes this movie.
Yeah.
I mean, Duncan Jones made the movie, and his vision, as you said, is seen as it should be. But it was like this was built for Sam Rockwell.
Do you know it wasn't like it was built for Sam Rockwell? Duncan Jones literally built this movie because he wanted a movie for Sam Rockwell.
Well, then there you go.
Cute.
Yeah. So
And it is perfect.
Yeah.
I think this is the most perfect this movie could be.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it is actually, as made evident by other Duncan Jones movies, I think this is the maximum of his potential. In my opinion.
Have you seen?
Sorry, Duncan Jones.
I do want to get a quick, show of hands. Who's seen Source Code?
Me, I have.
You have, AJ?
Yeah.
And so just Noah,
Yeah.
AJ, and me. Okay.
Yeah.
While I don't know I don't think it's better than Moon. I think Source Code's a great movie. Too.
It is. It's really good,
Yeah.
or
And
it's really intriguing.
And it plays around with really interesting ideas as well. And then he just falls off precipitously after that, and I don't understand why.
It's like, for me,
His father
I enjoy.
finally catches up with him. The
For me,
eccentricity comes
Yeah.
out.
Yeah, for me, I actually enjoy Warcraft, but I can also admit that it's a guilty pleasure.
Yeah, it's a flawed work.
Yes, there's a much better Warcraft movie that could be made.
Yeah.
But after that,
Hey,
Yeah.
I mean, we're not in no way revealing our hand about the next movie.
Yeah.
But
and
It's
there
no
might be
Space
some contention.
Odyssey. Or Space
wait a
Oddity,
second.
I should say.
So I remember hearing about Source Code, but I was pretty sure I hadn't seen it. I just looked it up to refresh my memory, and I have, but it was only once, and
Yeah.
it was a while ago, so I just didn't remember.
what are your vibes? Positive, negative?
Oh yeah, I remember being really intrigued by it, so now I want to
Yeah.
watch it again because all those details have gone away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
All right. You crunch those numbers
Yeah,
for us.
yeah, under pressure here. Let's see. So for our Moon Age Daydream, we've got an 8.9.
I couldn't quite clear the 9.
You're welcome.
Sad.
There
Yeah, he'd see it.
is a tie for 8.9. Fistful of Dollars, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, Moon, and then we have below that The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo at 8.8. The Fisher King, which again wasn't technically a franchise, but there it is. And
Love
above it we have The Prince of Egypt at a 9.1, Django Unchained, and 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Good company.
Alright.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Good
that is
company.
good company. It's not any, it's at least not in the Tomb of the Dragon Emperor range.
Yeah, it would need to be. Actually, David would have needed to score it a whole 1 point lower for it to be tied there
Yeah,
with his
like-
score for Tomb of the Dragon Emperor, the Mummy, that
7.
is.
Great movie.
Yeah, and in fact, I think if
Great motion picture is what you're supposed to say.
if Moon had Yetis throwing footballs from one side of the moon to the other,
I don't know if he did. I might have.
He'd
ranked this
probably
movie
add in
higher.
another. He'd
Yeah.
probably add in another point.
This might be
there.
a 9. If
push
that
it up.
had that.
Exactly.
Hey, if you haven't seen The Mummy, Tomb of the Dragon Emperor, do yourself a favor. It's a treat. Make some popcorn. It's date night, movie night.
Should have
it's-
recast
it's
Sam
extremely
Rockwell with
rewatchable.
Mariah Bello.
I honestly,
Would have been the golden years.
All right, critics. On Rotten Tomatoes, this movie has a 90%
Hey.
with an audience score of 89%.
Wow.
What?
What? We're right on it.
Yeah. Metacritic, 67 out of 100. Still in the green, but that's weirdly lower than I would have thought.
Yeah.
Just even on Metacritic. But an 8.3 from audiences on Metacritic. And a pretty high score on IMDb of 7.8. So really positive to very positive reviews for Moon from a critical standpoint. Let's move on to box office. This movie is budgeted at $5 million.
Wow.
Dang, that's
Yep.
low.
It released wide on June 12th in 2009. Also playing in theaters were The Hangover, Up, The Taking of Pelham 123, that's the remake, Night at the Museum, and Night at the Museum, Battle of the Smithsonian.
Dang.
Weird.
Was that the second or the third? I don't know. Who cares?
I think it's 3.
Who cares?
Noah, what's your prediction for the worldwide box office for Moon?
115 million.
115 million. Yeah. Arena.
110.
You sucker.
AJ.
I'm going to back out because I know this already.
Okay. David.
15 million.
That's just too low.
Is going up against The
David
Hangover.
is the winner.
No.
Suck it, bitches.
What is it? There's no way.
10.
The movie only made $9,700,000.
I thought I was still pretty on the low end there.
What?
Yeah. But as alarming as that sounds, it really isn't. This movie had a very small, limited platform release where it was just slowly being rolled out in
Sundance
theaters.
first, yeah.
Yeah, it was almost going to be a direct-to-DVD type situation, but at the last minute, Sony Pictures was like, put it in theaters. And turns out that was a really good choice because it did have a very good week-over-week return on money, even though that doesn't sound like a lot. It kind of kept improving.
Doubled its budget.
And this was like, it was in very few theaters. Like, it did not have like a wide rollout like you would typically see from a lot of movies of this ilk. And it garnered very good word of mouth, and it has a number of awards under its belt. And
So
even
in other
though
words, you're saying though that they didn't market it for theaters at all.
yeah, not really. Like if it was minimal. And to add another feather in this movie's cap, it has really done well on like DVD, Blu-ray. It has garnered that cult following. I wouldn't even say it's a cult following anymore. I think just the general public know what Moon is and know, and even if they haven't seen it, like me, know that it's regarded as a good movie. So like that's kind of what I think about where Moon's at. It's an overall success story, and there's a reason there's a sequel because I think it's because this movie made waves behind it. Like, it wasn't necessarily just this big, didn't make a big splash when it came out, but it keeps like reverberating, and people keep like coming back to it.
Don't make it sound like the sequel was made though because people were clamoring for this movie and then they made a sequel. They're very different.
No, I think it is Duncan Jones. He had a hit with Source Code. But it was the 1-2 punch of Moon being an exceptionally good movie and Source Code making money, and then Netflix being like, hey, we need directors to direct things for our platform. And hey, Duncan Jones, what do you got? What do you want to do? And he's like, well, I'm going to continue this thing.
No, I think he had a project and he's like, I'm going to do this and then tease at the other movie I made.
It could be,
That's how it does not. It's not a sequel.
We'll discuss this.
We'll talk about it.
So it is. This movie does have the biggest quote unquote ever sequel.
Franchise inheritor.
Yes, and Duncan Jones himself has called it the spiritual sequel, which I know that isn't technically sequel, but in this movie, we literally have the character from this movie making a very brief cameo appearance, acknowledging that they do in fact inhabit the same world. So it is the same. I don't know. You would not
same universe. The characters could meet each other.
Yeah, and the biggest comparison we've made so far is similar to Blade Runner and Soldier, which Blade Runner, it's obviously definitely its own thing, and weirdly another cyberpunk like Mute is. But then we have Soldier, which technically takes place in the same universe as Blade Runner, but doesn't share anything really in common, other than having like one of the hovering cars from I forget what they're called in Blade Runner, like in the background in like covered in wreckage or whatever. Like so, it's that kind of yes, it's a stretch, but even the directors acknowledged that these are connected. in some way. So that's why we are talking about Moon, and next week we're talking about Duncan Jones's Mute. It's
I'm excited.
I'm excited too.
Refrain from opinion.
Yeah, no opinions. It's gonna be great. Definitely haven't seen it yet, as evidenced by. Yeah, can't wait to talk about it. It's gonna be a lively conversation, I think, and I think there's gonna be, maybe, if I had to predict, some more diverse opinions on this one once all the dust has settled. So
If you're a fan of Mute, tune in.
yeah, or not if you
Do.
we'll see.
Or Paul
We'll
Rudd's
see.
mustaches.
Yeah, all right. That wraps up our episode covering Moon. Next week, once again, Mute. It's going to be our first movie without a box office game. Or a box office section, because it was on Netflix. So that'll be sad. Goodbye, guys.
Bye.
Yeah. Speaking of Mute, you look like a radioactive tampon, like a banana with a yeast infection.